I'm sure you remember, but for the listeners, that you came to India and spoke at one of the Barefoot Strong Summits.
Best human movement is sort of like that. We're in control, but we're also surrendering to the free forces around us.
I mean, that's really where the emotional side of movement comes in. Hello and welcome to another episode of Root to Rise. My name is Dr. Emily Splickle, your host, and I am so excited for today's episode. We are talking to one of my very good friends and on a topic that I personally find fascinating, so I hope you find fascinating as well. Today's guest is a true pioneer in the movement, coaching, and personal development space. Dan Edwards began his journey in martial arts when he was 8 years old, and then it led him on a path that eventually he found parkour in 2001. He trained parkour under the French founders, and it really led him to find Parkour Generations, which is the world's leading authority on parkour education, and helped him establish Parkour UK, which is the world's first governing body for this incredible sport. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Emily. It's a real pleasure to see you again. Always a great pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. So for the listeners who may not be familiar with parkour, can you please share with them and set the tone of what is this sport and how did it start?
It's a good question. I mean, most people have probably seen it by now on the movies or TV commercials, or and most people know it as that roof jumping stuff. But that's just a small element of what we do. And parkour is really a movement discipline based on training basically all the sort of foundational locomotion patterns of the human being. So running, jumping, climbing, swinging, rolling, vaulting, and using those to master any terrain that you encounter to be able to get from one place to another, basically. So it's a very functional, very practical movement discipline. And it gives you the potential to do things like amazing stunts, but that's just a small part of it.
So what really led to the origin of this sport, and when did it become more organized? Was it just some kids playing in their backyard or on the streets and kind of it evolved into something, or what's a little bit deeper on how it became a formal sport?
Yeah, I mean, you could do a whole podcast just on that topic, because from a sociological point of view, it's kind of difficult to sort of pin down exactly why that particular group of young men and women in France sort of coalesced their play into a discipline that became a movement, became parkour, because every kid moves and every kid explores the environment, and that's happened since the dawn of time. But for some reason, in the early 90s, there was this, in the suburbs of Paris, there was a particular kind of chemical mix of individuals who, as they were growing up, they took their play and their exploration of space and just sort of continued to refine it and test themselves further and further and further as they got older. And it became in their teenage years, they then sort of realized actually what we're doing is kind of our own discipline. It's kind of it sort of had rules and kind of concepts and philosophies and principles to it, and that was the birth of parkour. But as to why that group created at that specific point in time, it's very difficult to say. But it grew from there, and it went worldwide. It came to the UK pretty quickly from France. Okay. And from the UK it went internationally. But it was when he came here that we were able to sort of, I guess in some ways, formalize it and create systems around how to teach it and create classes and engage with authorities and governments and to get some sort of recognition for it as a formal discipline. But that process took a long time. It wasn't until 2016 that we got it recognized as a sport in the UK. So it took a long time.
Okay.
But yeah, so as to why it happened there, who knows?
So when you're jumping from railing to railing, rooftop to rooftop, to me that would attract a certain personality. What do you think it is about parkour that attracts certain personalities, and what personality is that? Or are people trying to seek something through that method or through that sport?
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely, it's the same as any discipline, I suppose. They're seeking something more than just being good good at a sport. Everyone's looking for something deeper, right? And parkour is a great way to learn about yourself, and that's, I guess, what keeps people coming back. In the early days, it definitely attracted a certain type of person, 100%, because it was very hard to access. There was no formalization around it at all. So you sort of had to be the kind of person that was very agentic and autotelic and sort of wanting to, you'd be willing to make the very hard journey to hunt down the founding practitioners in the suburbs of Paris and sort of do your best to keep up with them and learn from them. So it was a very specific kind of mindset in the early days, a slight madness maybe, and a slight, kind of obsessive compulsive mindset to go and learn that particular thing. But now it's obviously, since we started teaching it and we open it up and we have spaces that do it and qualifications for coaches, now it's much more accessible to everyone. So they're everyone from very young children to people in their last third of life engage with it, and everyone from very high level athletes to very detrained people. So anyone can engage with it because it's really just human movement. So now it's much more accessible, much more open, and people definitely use it to feel more free, to find out sort of what their body and their mind can do in space, and to restore an element of kind of fun to movement and to training, which is often we lose as adults. We see going to the gym as hard work and a chore and like punishment or penalty you have to pay for eating too much and all this kind of stuff. So something like parkour is, when people try that, they realize, like, okay, this is going to make me fit and strong. Yeah. But it's also great fun, and that for a lot of adults, that's quite captivating.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with the TV show American Ninja Warrior. Mm. Do you feel that is that a similarity in the methodology and the mindset around parkour, or is that just a kind of glamorized TV version of some of the elements?
It's a good question. I mean, Ninja Warrior, from Japan, has been around a long, long time. Since back in the 80s, I think, the original Ninja Warrior show. So it's not the same discipline. It's just that parkour people, the skills that you learn in parkour make that kind of activity pretty easy. They make obstacle courses like that, which are made safe and indoors with lots of mats and things like that. They make them, because parkour people are used to moving in an environment where you are your safety mat, you keep yourself safe. To be put in an environment like that where you can just throw yourself at stuff, those obstacles become relatively easy. Okay. So parkour people did really well in those competitions and moved towards them and would win those competitions pretty regularly. But it's not the same discipline. That is, as you say, that's kind of that's just a physical. That's just an expression of what's capable with parkour physically. But parkour is a much more complete discipline, I suppose, more similar to a martial art or something like that. It's much more about a discipline of self-improvement, a transformative practice, rather than just being, athletically capable and agile.
Man, that makes sense. I know one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on this show is that I am fascinated on the mental side and the emotional side of parkour. Having done a little bit of it, it's something to run towards an 8-foot wall and kind of scale it and then jump to another concrete apparatus. So I'm sure you remember, but for the listeners, that you came to India and spoke at one of the Barefoot Strong Summits. This was probably 2015, around there, 15, 16 probably. Right. And when we were there, you gave me a book, or you told me about a book that was called The Rise of Superman. Fascinating book that I think everybody should read. But in there, a lot of the premise of that book was around flow. And you were the first person who introduced flow to me. Can you share with the listeners a little bit about what flow is? How does that tie into parkour, and then just your philosophy and movement in life?
Yeah, I mean, flow is it's very important. It's a state of the brain. It's a neurological state that you get into when you're basically very focused on one thing, to the point where your sense of self kind of takes a back seat, and there's no longer a separation between you and the thing you're doing. So it's in sports is often called being in the zone. It's no a guy called Csikszentmihalyi Mihaly. He was the one that coined it as flow, and it's most people have experienced it. Most people do experience it when you're doing something you absolutely love doing, and so you're just fully engaged in it. Like playing a sport at a high level, or just if you're a kid, just playing with your friends, or if you're a musician, playing a song or composing music or something like that. You get into this state where time basically disappears, and you're just there's no sort of sense of self, and it's thought to be kind of the optimal state in terms of happiness for a human being because there's no resistance to your environment, but also the optimal state of performance. You perform best in that state because everything is aligned. All of your psychology and your body, everything is aligned and pointing in the same direction and fully focused on a task. So it's thought to be kind of the optimal state for humans, and the one we seek out the most. And what the guys, Jamie and Stephen in Rise of Superman, they basically identified that a lot of the lifestyle disciplines, so lifestyle sports like parkour, skateboarding, motocross, wingsuiting, climbing, free solo, all these sort of disciplines, they put you in a flow state almost by default as soon as you start practicing them because of they have elements like they have a sense of risk, they have a sense of normally they're carried out in an amazing environment of some sort or an unusual environment, and these are triggers for the flow state. So those disciplines put you in flow quickly and whenever you practice them, and their thesis is that is the reason those disciplines have seen massive progress in a very short time, compared to sports that you can do without being in flow. Like for example, football. It's great to be in flow when you play football, but you can play football without being in flow. Whereas when you're doing something like parkour, you sort of have to be in flow because there's the element of risk and consequence. So you're always 100% focused on what you're doing. Your mind can't be anywhere else. So it's very central to parkour training. And yeah, I think once you understand it and you experience it and you feel it in whatever practice you do, you want more of it. So it becomes something you sort of try to engender and try to seek out. Yeah,
kind of like not an addiction, but maybe like an addiction to the flow state?
Sort of, yeah. But the downside to that is that the minute you try to be in flow, you can't, because flow is an unconscious state. So the minute you're sort of consciously thinking, I need to be in a flow state, you're out of it. So it's one of those things whereby you can't seek it and be in it. You just sort of have to create the conditions for it to arise. There's another really good book called Bone Games, which is about exactly that. It's by a mountain runner, fell runner, who basically discovered that state and then spent 10, 15 years trying to recapture it, realizing that he and then eventually realizes that the journey to try to recapture it was preventing him from experiencing it again. So that's another great book on this topic.
Got it. So it's almost like chasing flow. So how often do you get into a flow state? Do you seek flow?
Again, I think if you engage with a practice like parkour, you're gonna, I was training earlier today, and you're gonna be in it not for the whole time you're training, because it comes and go, and it's not like a binary thing of like you're in flow, you're not. It's kind of a spectrum, so you can be more in it or more out of it. But if you train in something like parkour or do anything that you love doing and you just take away the distractions and focus solely on that one thing, then it's likely to come about. It's quite likely to come about in that situation. You can't control it exactly, but it is you create the conditions where it's going to come about. And training in parkour, you're going to experience it during that training session at some stage, just because you get so focused on achieving a task. And there are consequences to not getting it right. There might even be small consequences, like you land on your butt and bruise yourself, or you look like an idiot, in front of your mates. But those consequences could be enough to focus you so that you're suddenly everything else disappears and it's just you and the jump. That happens pretty much every time you train in parkour.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I highly recommend that everyone read the book. I was not familiar with flow until I read that, again, like 10, 12 years ago. And what's interesting is what puts me in flow is when I present at a conference.
All right.
Which is not dangerous per se, but I am in the moment and I'm so embodied in that present moment that it leaves me feeling more satisfied than anything else. So it's interesting that it could be something like that as well that is inputting. There's not a dangerous element to it.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. In the book Rise of Superman, Jamie and Stephen, they basically identify, I think, 17 triggers for flow, and only one of them is risk.
Oh.
So there are many triggers, and the more of those triggers you have going on at once, the more likely a flow state is to arise. So yeah, consequence and risk or physical risk is only one of them. So, and it could be, I was going to say for you, it probably is presenting or something like that, because, you do it a lot. And I know, being a presenter too, I know that when you do present, again, you can't think about anything else, right?
Right.
100% you're just there, because in a way, there is the consequence of, there is some risk, right, in a way, because there's the risk of not doing a good job on stage under massive observation of thousands of people.
Right.
And that's a fear. Glossophobia, the fear of public speaking, is the most common fear in the world. So you are engaging with a fear every time you do it, and you're mastering that fear. So there is a consequence to it. You're just very good at doing it well, and that's why you enjoy it.
Huh. Very insightful. I like that. So another concept that you introduced to me too, which I love, I've actually shared it with so many people, and I've done just a couple keynotes in my career. But when I do, I focus on this topic. So thank you for sharing this with me. And it is breaking the jump. Can you share with the listeners a little bit about this concept and the origin behind it, and just how they could utilize this philosophy in their life?
Yeah, breaking the jump is one of the key elements. It's one of the key concepts, if not the key principle of parkour. It comes from the original French "quatre d'un saut," which means literally to break a jump. And the principle, the name, comes from the idea of breaking a jump meant the first time you succeeded at a certain jump or a certain challenge in parkour. So if you found a difficult jump, it may take you half an hour to sort of deconstruct it and build up the psychological will to do it and practice the technique and that, and then eventually you do it. That first time you do it, where you align the psychological requirements and the physical skill and bring that all together to do it, that is called breaking the jump. That's when you've broken the jump. And then after that, it's just training to refine the skill, right? So breaking the jump is basically engaging with something at the edge of your ability. It doesn't necessarily have to be in parkour, it could be in anything, but it's that time when you're engaging with something right on the edge of your ability, what's called the zone of proximal development, I suppose, in sports science terms, where you're really pushing the boundaries of what you can do when you align all your abilities. And we engage with it a lot in parkour. Almost every session you'll encounter movements and challenges and jumps where you have to sort of bring everything into alignment to make it happen and commit to it. So it's something we're very familiar with, and one of the key factors within it is fear, of course, because that fear is a positive emotion within us to keep us safe. So whenever you're trying to do something on the edge of your ability, very sensibly, the emotion of fear will arise, basically to check you, to make you think, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you've got everything right? Are you sure you've thought it through? Do you have the right ability for it? Are you in the right shape for it? So it's basically a kind of a safety check on what you're doing, and you should run through that checklist. So you should engage with the fear and use it as a positive guide. And assuming you tick yes to all the things that fear is asking you, then you can go ahead and do it. But if some of the boxes are not ticked, then you should listen to the fear and be like, okay, maybe not today. I'm going to leave it and train a bit harder and come back to it next week. So we use it as a friendly guide, really. But fear is the central element of it, and we want to be experiencing that in our parkour training. We want to be feeling that moment of where fear arises just a little bit, because if we're not, then it means we're in the comfort zone. If there's no fear at all, it probably means you're staying in your comfort zone, and you don't grow, you don't improve when you're in your comfort zone. So the same way when you present, if you're presenting at a big show you haven't done before, probably before you go on, you have like butterflies and nerves, and all presenters do. Mm-hmm. And that's feeling of fear, but you use it positively, you engage with it, and it sharpens your thought processes. It makes you more aware, more alert, more on the ball. So you utilize the fear in a positive way, and it makes you better. But if you didn't feel it, it probably means that you're just doing something that's very easy for you, and you're probably not going to get any growth there. So it's a really necessary emotion and a key element within the breaking jumps process.
How would you explain that to a child? The reason I'm asking, my daughter's 5, just turned 6, and she's a gymnast, and she trains 10 hours a week. Mommy has big dreams for her. But I've taught her and seen her on that edge, and I'm trying to understand the psychology of how to guide her to essentially break the jump. How would you teach that to a child?
I think the key thing is, and this is similar with adults really, is questioning. When people are afraid and they're experiencing fear, the thing to do is to ask them good questions, really, rather than just trying to, G them up and tell them like, oh, just break through the fear, you can do it, and just do the jump. That kind of approach is pretty simplistic and not really. It doesn't really solve the issue, because you might use anger or just intensity to break it, to break through the fear, but you'll have to do that every time. It becomes very demanding and it may not be safe. So the thing to do, I would recommend normally, is just ask good questions. And get specific, like, if someone's afraid of something, ask them, especially a kid, like, let's think about that. What are you afraid of? What particular thing are you afraid of happening? And then get them to try to identify, I'm actually afraid of this happening. And the more you can go into that, the more you can specify what that fear is, the more you can then identify and help them overcome it. Because you go, okay, well, if you're afraid of that, let's just work on that one thing, get you really comfortable with that. And then once they've done a bit of training on that particular element, you then step back and say, okay, now how does the challenge feel, whatever the challenge is? And they might go, oh, now I don't feel afraid. Because they've got rid of the one specific thing they were afraid of. Because fear is not general, it is always very specific. So the key thing is to ask, what are you afraid of? What specifically are you afraid of? And then ask the question, how can we get rid of that? How can you get more comfortable with that? And they normally know, and with a bit of guidance and a bit of coaching, you can get them through it. So pretty similar to dealing with adults, really. It's just ask them the question, and they will normally have the right answer for you. And often they will be afraid of stuff that you don't expect, which is why it's important to ask that question. Because we might think, oh, they're afraid of it because of this, because that's what we're afraid of.
Right.
But they may be afraid of something completely different. So you need to find out what that is first.
Yep. Great. Thank you. I will try that at the slide park the next time. So do you think this concept of breaking the jump applies outside, or how could it apply for the listeners outside of physical challenges, like going down something scary or whatever the physical movement may be? Could it be something that at work or a relationship or different life decisions? So
there's two ways to think about fear, I think. The emotion of fear is like, the emotion of joy, the emotion of anger, the emotion of love. They're sort of emotional substrates that exist within you. And then you attach them to specific things. And then they become like things. So you attach the emotion of joy to a specific thing, that thing becomes pleasurable. If you attach the emotion of fear to a specific thing, you get a fear of that thing, you get a phobia, So, but fear, the general emotion of fear is always there. So anything you do in life, there will be a fear that will come about as a result of doing that thing, just because you're doing something. So it could be, absolutely, you'll get fears in social situations, you'll get fears in your job, your vocational situations, you'll get fears in with animals, environmental fears, you get fear of heights, you get fear of darkness, you get all these fears that come about from us just exploring our world. And these are all learned fears, right? Because there's only two fears that are hardwired, which are the sort of startle reflex fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. So these things are in the brain from birth, but pretty much every other fear is learned. So they come about just from exploring your world and encountering things and then going, okay, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, this is safe, this is not safe. So so absolutely, once you get good at understanding what fear is as a mechanism within your brain, you can then apply it to anything else. If you're afraid of going for a job interview or afraid of going and talking to a good-looking person in a bar, it's the same. The fear mechanism is the same, and therefore breaking the jump, it's the same thing to actually go and talk to that person is the same as the psychological energy it takes to do the jump. It's the same psychological energy you're using to break through a fear barrier. So once you've done it in one environment, it will help you do it better in other environments. So yeah, because you're just practicing at managing and engaging the emotion of fear. So parkour in some ways is just the embodied practice of fear. And if you get good at that, it makes you very comfortable with other things, especially things that are less like visceral fears. If you go and train in, I was talking to a very experienced practitioner this weekend who was here at an event we were doing, and he was doing a talk not on fear, but on how to use your life well and how not to waste time. And basically he was saying that he understood that, he just started setting up his own businesses recently, and he was thinking, this is a scary thing, setting up my own businesses. But then he realized, wait a minute, I've spent 20 years doing very, very high level extreme movements and jumps across buildings and mountains and things that are very high risk. And if I didn't get them right, I could be very badly hurt, because he was a very high level practitioner, or lose my life. And then he was like, well, if I did all that, why am I afraid of, potentially losing a bit of money by setting up a business and not working? Like, who cares? Like there's nothing. I'm not really risking anything compared to what I was risking for 20 years in my practice. And as soon as you realize that, it was like, oh yeah, I can go full steam ahead and just take these risks and go for it and do stuff, because you suddenly realize that those risks, those fears were much more easy to handle than the visceral fear of like keeping your life safe, while you're moving at a high level in parkour training. So it does carry over, to everything.
Yeah, and you could probably see a lot of self-growth on the other side of when you actually break a jump. And I remember one of my most pivotal jumps that I broke is when I left traditional podiatry and I left surgery and traditional medicine. And that, to me, I felt like that was exactly what you're describing, where I had one foot there, I was right on the edge, and I'm like, I just need to push into this and essentially break the jump and leave traditional podiatry, and this whole world opened up. So to the listeners, definitely push into breaking the jump, because you don't know what's on the other side. Want to switch gears a little bit. I do have to talk about feet with you because of the demands of parkour. What do you think about feet, the ground, just how you play with the ground through parkour movements, and then footwear, and how footwear could impede or actually support the movements of parkour?
It's something that I implement and incorporate in our teaching and our education programs a lot, and in our training a lot, and even more so since we met. I think we first met at IDEA, maybe one of the big fitness things in the States. And I remember sitting in on one of your workshops, and that was pretty awesome, because I remember a lot of the stuff you were saying. I was like, wait, this actually, especially when you went into the feet and the nerves and the absorbing of impact and how they tell that, and I was like, wait a minute, this is exactly how she's basically explaining the mechanisms by which we absorb impact in parkour, and this makes a lot of sense. It all kind of correlated exactly with our understanding of parkour, and I was like, this is perfect. I can actually use this to now explain why these sorts of landings and why the foot needs to do this in parkour. So it was incredibly useful meeting you and learning all that stuff from you. And then being able to translate it and basically use that terminology to explain. Because in parkour, for sure, the feet, the base of all movement, as you know and you teach, and if your feet aren't strong and capable, it will hugely limit what you can do in parkour. It will massively limit your expression of force and power, which therefore limits your ability to absorb force, which means will affect the amount of impact you can take safely. In parkour, that's absolutely central. So it's really, really important. And we do loads of barefoot training. We do lots of footwork, lots of big toe training to work with the power and all that sort of stuff, and the spread, and super, super important. So parkour is the use of the human body, optimal use of the human body to cross terrain. It's the only discipline that uses all the locomotion patterns and trains all the locomotion patterns. It's the only sport in the world that uses all of them. And as a result, the whole of your body is your tool. So you cannot afford to have a weakness in parkour. Your grip must be strong, your feet must be strong, your core must be strong, your upper body strength must be good, your leg strength must be good, your power must be good, your agility must be good, your mobility must be good, your flexibility must be good, your elasticity, everything's going to be good. So because this is our tool and we use it, every element of it. So when you understand that, you realize, like, okay, I really need to make sure my feet work properly and optimally. So I think it's 100% central to movement. And for most people, it completely changes everything when you identify just how weak and limited their foot is by the shoes they've worn and all this sort of stuff. And, that when they begin to change that, they become much more athletic. So I think it's very important, yeah.
Do you tell people to get out of cushion shoes when they're doing parkour, like their first classes? Either take their shoes off or take off the hokas?
Oh my God, yes, the hokas. Yes, basically we say, so, we don't force anything, but we will, early on in their training, we will say, right, you do need to think about your footwear choices. Because basically in parkour, the more experience you get, the thinner sole shoe you will wear. Basically because you realize that you need to have what we call touch, so you need to have sensitivity with the ground. So your foot needs to be able to feel the ground and feel the objects you're trying to land on, because we're needing to land on as you say, sometimes we land on rails, we're landing with great precision, and so your foot needs to sort of feel exactly where it is on the surface, and it might need to mold and adapt to that surface. So you need shoes that have soles that are very flexible and light and thin. And the thicker the sole, the more it's, as you explained so well in all your education, the thicker the sole, the more you're sort of taken away from the impact absorption abilities of the body, and we don't want that. So we tell them pretty early on, right, if they come in wearing massive thick hokas or really thick running shoes with these big plastic soles, we normally say, look, we can't force you, but really think about the shoe choice, because if you move around in a shoe like that, the chance of rolling your ankle and in getting an inversion is going to be very high. Plus, you're just taking more force in your knees and lower back than you need to be. It's much better just to strip back, do smaller movements with a thinner soled shoe with a wider toe box, and just let your feet do a lot of the work and let your feet get strong, and then you'll be able to do the big jumps and your body will be stronger for it. So yeah, we pretty early on get them to understand that. And encourage them to think about it. And if they train for any length of time, they will do that. Just because they'll look at the other practitioners, and they'll look at the experienced people and go, all of those people wear X, Y, or Z shoe, so maybe I should get that shoe. So they then all kind of replicate that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you focus on continuity of momentum? Or maybe you would use another word, but you have to always be moving. I imagine that you don't jump off of a railing, land, stop, hold, run to the next apparatus. There's this fluidity that you keep moving with gravity and momentum. Mm-hmm. Am I saying that the right way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, sometimes we need to do what we call sticker landing. Sometimes we do need to stop dead. If you're jumping, from wall to wall and you're 20 feet in the air, you need to stick dead on that wall because you don't want to fall over the edge, right? So sometimes we need to be able to do both. We need to be able to stop with great precision, which is what we call sticking a landing, and hold that form and posture and absorb the impact in our body. And we also need to be able to land and keep moving. So the elasticity, the plyometric ability in the body is very, very key for us. The elasticity in general, we want to create an elastic body that can bounce, that can rebound, and that can transition force, use the free forces of physics within our movement, because movement is an interplay of muscular effort and so self-generated energy, force, and the free forces like gravity, like momentum, like muscle elasticity, the stored energy that goes in the stretch shortening cycle. So these forces, we're combining those forces with our muscular force to create movement. That's how all movers and athletes and animals move so quickly and powerfully. So we want to be able to master those forces, but we also need to be really good at managing the force that we generate ourselves, and just being able to control every movement as and when we need to. But yeah, ideally you're looking for this fluid, graceful, non-stopping movement like an animal. I mean, animals are always kind of our gurus in parkour, because the way they move is so effortless, so fluid, so graceful, so elastic, and so free and lacking in limitations, really, because they're not limited by the controlling prefrontal cortex that we have. So they're just moving like instinctively, an automated movement, and we want to get that. And so, the fluid movement is absolutely a key part of it, and that requires a certain amount of surrender. It's kind of the sort of the paradox, really, of movement is that we want absolute control of our movement, so we can do very sort of high level and precise things. But we also need to be able to surrender to the free forces such as momentum and gravity and elasticity, because if you don't surrender to them, you're not going to be able to move very well. So it's kind of this paradox of like, we need real control and also real surrender. A way to think of it, I think, sometimes is like dancing. Mm-hmm. So when you dance, a dancer is in control of the dance, but they're also surrendering to the music, right? They're also being moved by the music, and the music is directing their movements. So, but they're also at all times in control of their movements. So a dancer is in control, but also fully surrendering to the music. And the best human movement is sort of like that. We're in control, but we're also surrendering to the free forces around us, which is quite an interesting thing to get into, I suppose.
I mean, that's really where the emotional side of movement comes in. Is when you can find that element of control and surrender, is then you are releasing and finding, I guess, that true happiness that you were talking about earlier. Yeah,
that's when you'll feel the best. Yeah, like when you're dancing and you just surrender to the music is when, you feel great and there's no sense of self. And it's the same in movement. When you move really well in parkour or gymnastics or any sport, and when you get the movement, when everything is like perfect and you're in the zone, it feels amazing. And that's a pretty good state to be in, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to cover one last topic before we wrap up, and that is physical literacy in children. And I know this is a topic that you're really passionate about. Just what does that mean, and why is that so important to you?
It's a huge topic, and it's important to the whole world. I mean, it's important to the species, really. So, so it's a pretty big one. But so physical literacy really is just the idea of when you're growing up, if you expose a kid to lots of locomotor play and just, make sure they do lots of physical play outdoors with their friends and no focus, just let them move and explore their environment and jump around and climb trees and fight and play or whatever. That's the natural way for the human body and brain to build movement skill and cohesive, coordinated network in its nervous system, so that it can respond to stimuli, it can keep itself safe, it can do tasks, it can whatever. So the human body and brain needs to have that growing up. It needs to have lots of it, lots and lots and lots and lots of it, because it's literally how it's calibrating its movement skills. If you therefore deprive a kid of that at a young age and make them sit down a lot of the time or put them in environments where they can't play and can't move, they don't actually develop, they don't calibrate that movement skill. So they end up being a physically illiterate adult. And if you are physically illiterate or less literate, you're less likely to engage in movement and physical activities of all sorts, because you're probably not going to be very good at it. So it will feel very hard and it will feel bad. It will feel tough and difficult and clumsy. And so you'll move away from it. And therefore you get into this negative spiral and you end up with a generation of people who are not very physical, therefore very unfit, therefore very susceptible to things like diabetes and heart disease, postural problems, liver issues, all the things that actually are responsible for the deaths of most humans. So therefore, the best way to prevent that is to make sure that we have physically literate generations of kids, so that they're more likely to easily engage with sport and physical activity and fitness training as they get older. And therefore, it's super important, because we're in an environment now where more and more people are living in urban environments and industrialized worlds. So fewer and fewer people are moving regularly. So, and we can already see this very easily in the young generations of kids that we teach around the world. in the built-up areas in the cities, the more industrialized and urban the space is, like Hong Kong, places like this, Saudi Arabia, even and Western cities too, or whatever. But the more they raise in those cities, the less likely they are to be physically literate. And it's a very stark difference between those kids and kids raised in, say, the countryside. They're just night and day in terms of their physical literacy and what they can do with their bodies. So, we're putting whole generations of kids in environments where they're not able to play or move, and we're setting them up for a very difficult adult life where they're going to be sick and ill and not good movers and clumsy and awkward and more prone to injury and more prone to heart disease, etc. So we're setting them up for a very bad adulthood health-wise, simply because we're not getting them to move enough when they're young. And so it's a very difficult problem to solve in the industrialized and urbanizing world, but it's something that we do kind of have to find solutions for. Otherwise, you'll see a continued decline in the physical capabilities of the species at large, which is obviously not what we do.
What do you think is the cognitive effect of that?
And yes, the cognitive effect is also huge because the brain is primed by movement. When you do complex movement skills, that's the 20 minutes after that is when your brain is generating the most new brain cells. Okay. So cognitive intelligence increases the more you move. I mean, one of the reasons we have the intelligence we have is because we had to develop such complex movement skills. And because we did develop such complex movement skills like throwing and cooking and catching and building fires, and these things help shape our intelligence. So our cognitive growth is tied in with movement. There's loads of studies now that show the more you move it, the more you keep up movement skills as you get older, the more likely you are to stave off things like Alzheimer's and things like that. So, and you can actually reverse those things in older people by giving them movement training. So therefore, you have to get people moving and you have to keep them moving, not only because of physical health, but because of their cognitive health. And we are now seeing negative results on that side, right? I think I heard recently that the UK has lost an IQ point on average across the board. And that's a huge negative. And if that is true, then they attribute that to the rise of technology, social media, more screens. But not only the use of the screens, but the fact that by using the screens, you're being more sedentary. So you're moving less, you're engaging more with physical skills less, you're developing fewer physical social cues, etc. So you're just moving less, and therefore we're becoming less intelligent. Right? It's a big problem, and we need to get humans moving more. We need to get kids moving more. We need to give them environments where they can move and can play. We need to be brave enough as adults to say, yes, let them play, let them take physical risks, because if you don't, you are subjecting them to, you are exposing them to the likelihood of a very unhealthy adulthood, and that is our fault as adults and as the parents and the schools and the educational systems and the governments. It's their fault if those kids then grow up and be unhealthy. It's not the kid's fault because the kid had no choice. So, it's a responsibility on us to be brave enough as a society to let kids move and play and take risks and live more like we used to live, back before this modern technological age. And even when I was a kid, kids moved way more than they do now. Yeah. And that's a difference of 30, 40 years. So it's a big problem.
Oh no, I could not agree more. And it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. And I make sure for my daughter, but I see the changes in school and technology. So, never stop moving. Keep moving, start off moving, and never stop moving. Thank you so much, Dan. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't, that you want to share, that you just want to leave the listeners with?
I mean, you're very good with your questions, so you ask sort of all the interesting stuff, which is great. But I think what I'd want to leave people with is, because kind of I don't want to end on a negative note, like, oh my God, this is a big problem, how do we solve it? But it is a big problem. We think, how do we solve it? But at the end of the day, you can't control, sort of on a large scale, you can't control most people are not able to control sort of what society does, but you can absolutely control your life and the life of your children, your friends, your family. You can influence that. So, and we have more and more information now than ever on how to stay healthy and how to move well and how to be fit. We've got so much good science around it now, and good examples of how to bake that into your life. And that's the thing I'd get people to focus on is. Society is just a collection of people. So if everyone on an individual level makes a positive change and a positive move towards that, then it will shift the direction society moves in. So that's what we have to just take personal responsibility for ourselves, I think. And everyone can do that because you've got, with the phone in your pocket, you've got access to all of human knowledge, at your fingertips now. So there's no excuse not to use that knowledge. And I think everyone should feel very empowered to be able to do that. And that's all you need to do is just focus on yourself and the people around you. And if we all do that, then maybe we sort of shift the direction of the Titanic away from the iceberg.
Yeah, collectively. Yeah.
Just by 1 degree,
Yep. So where can the listeners learn more about you, Parkour Generations, but just parkour in general and a lot of the philosophies you spoke about?
There's good parkour organizations all around the world in most countries. So wherever you are, you'll probably be able to find some good teachers. ParkourGenerations.com is our kind of umbrella website for our international branches, because we have branches around the world. So if you just go there, you'll be able to find probably something relatively near you and/or information about the discipline. And then you get started. Like I said, there's so much information online now. So many good sources of information, good tutorials. Good coaching groups to seek out. I would say just look for experienced coaches, look for experienced communities. If the coach has an ADAPT qualification, that's the global parkour coaching sort of official qualification. So if they've got that, then they're a professional coach, a decent coach. But I would say just do some research and look for good experienced communities, and then go and meet them and train with them and. Just see what they'll use your common sense and your wisdom and see, are these people genuine, serious practitioners that are going to be good to learn from? There are so many now around the world that you can find pretty much any country you're in. You'll be able to find someone who's going to be able to help.
I love that. I want to share one last little story about parkour as we wrap up. So, and this was, I don't know, years ago when I was living in New York City, and I went on a date, like a blind date, and I'm 5'2", and we went to parkour. That was our first date. I'm like, oh, this is great. This guy was like 7 feet tall. I'm just a giant. And I'm itty bitty next to him. And he was like, oh, you're short. I'm like, I don't know what to say. Sure. And, but we're doing this as our date. And I am proudly crushing it on this parkour course. And I scale at 8-foot wall and I'm jumping. I got the bars. I could do flips. And, he was doing his thing at 7 feet where he could probably just reach up and climb the wall. And then never heard from the guy again. And he left a message and said that I'm too short. And I was like, I just crushed this parkour course, even though I'm 5 feet. And it's just one of my funny stories about parkour. I was at Brooklyn Beast, which is a parkour gym in New York. Yeah, I thought it was so funny. But I was like, man, I got that 8-foot wall. I was so proud. But
I mean,
didn't get...
It's his loss, obviously. So.
I just thought it was a funny parkour story. Anyway, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate the conversation. I absolutely love your work. I love the messages that you're putting out and really your focus on the next generation and physical literacy. Very passionate about that. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. And likewise, keep doing what you're doing. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. And then thank you everyone for tuning in. Definitely check out the book, Rise of Superman. And I would try to explore how you can bring breaking the jump into your life. Enjoy.